So this is the strange case of the reluctant disciples. Let's pray. Help us, O God, as we reflect on words of ancient texts now, to hear in them whatever it is that you would speak to us in our own places, in our own circumstance. So bless us, we pray, O God, in both the speaking and the listening. Amen. I'm happy to be able to report that I have never been in jail. I know it sounds surprised. In fact, I've never even been convicted of anything, though if I should ever face the charge of being a Christian, I hope there would be enough evidence to find me guilty. I'm pretty sure that if I should ever find myself in prison, and if it became possible for me to escape, I'd get out of there as quickly as I possibly could. In this strange case of the reluctant escapees, two men who had been convicted of being followers of Jesus were given the perfect opportunity to reclaim their freedom, and they chose instead to stay where they were. For a little while, let's reflect on what we might learn about discipleship from the apparent lunacy of these reluctant escapees. So first of all, I think we can learn this. They seem to have been able to endure the circumstances in which they found themselves with some measure of peace. Whether it is a grace with which to be born or a skill to be developed, blessed are those who can experience contentment in circumstance in which they find themselves. But that seems to be very rare. A couple in their 60s were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary in a quiet, romantic little restaurant. Suddenly, a tiny fairy appeared out of nowhere and hovered just above the table. She said, "I have been watching you for years. I'm delighted in the love you obviously feel for one another. The intimacy of this celebration is just more proof of your wonderful relationship. In honor of your deep love and commitment to one another, I will grant each of you a wish. Choose carefully. Whatever it is will be yours." The wife replied, "I have so wanted to travel with my darling husband, but we've never had either the time or the money. My wish is to take a trip around the world." The fairy snapped her fingers and poof! 2 tickets appeared. Tickets to the Sea Princess. I want you to know, last week in Newfoundland, we saw the Sea Princess as it was leaving the harbor in Newfoundland, and it was on, I think, a 115-day trip around the world. Tickets just like that. You can imagine the joy. So the fairy turned to the husband, "And what, sir, is your fondest wish?" "Tell me the truth," he said. "As romantic as all this sounds, I have to take advantage of this opportunity, which will surely never come again. I'm sorry, my love, but my wish is to have a wife 30 years younger than me." Again, the fairy snapped her fingers, and he immediately became 92. I first used that in a sermon about 22 years ago. Thanks to those of you who remember for not giving it away. Truly a fairy tale, right? Truly a fairy tale. But we can understand what happened. There was an opportunity, or at least the appearance of an opportunity, and it looked so good to the guy. And we all know how it feels when something over there makes it hard to be satisfied with what we have right here. The grass looks greener, the income looks bigger, the rewards look better, the work looks easier, the house looks nicer, the other man or woman looks sexier, the other life looks happier, and then you realize that you're no longer satisfied with what you got. It's as if we are genetically predisposed to temptation. No matter what I order in any restaurant, if this is true of you, you know what I'm talking about. No matter what I order off any menu, whatever the person at the other table gets looks better than what I do. Surely, when they were given the opportunity to escape to the better world outside, Paul and Silas must have been incredibly tempted to escape. That's why it is so remarkable that they apparently found a measure of peace in the very circumstance of that prison cell. The tensions in their relationship had gotten so bad that Barb and Bob went to see a counselor. Now, the counselor was very good at her job, and she helped Bob see that he, in fact, had been acting like a bully in their relationship. He had been a bully in their home. It had become a kind of patriarchy in which it was usually his way or the highway. But in the counseling sessions, to his credit, Bob had an epiphany of self-awareness, and he quickly saw the error of his ways, with both shame for his behavior and wonder at his wife's perennial intolerance. He turned to Barb and he said, "When I behave so badly, hasn't it made you angry?" "Of course I get angry," she replied after a pause. "But you never said anything. How do you control your anger?" he said. She said, "I clean the toilet." This was not the reply Bob expected. Give me a minute. This was not the reply he expected. "How does cleaning the toilet make you feel better?" And she said, "I use your toothbrush." Of course, there are many ways of coping with circumstances that we would never choose. Barb found a measure of consolation in spitefulness. You know what that feels like, eh? A measure of consolation in spitefulness. Another way of coping with lousy circumstances is self-deception, to pretend that it isn't as bad as it really is. Sometimes we just suffer the misery with glum resignation. And there's always the option of escapism, be it drink, drugs, or any other diversion to distract us from the captivity of nasty circumstances. You read about the man in England, true story. He received some wonderful news, and he was furious, absolutely furious. 62-year-old John Brandrick of Newquay, England, was diagnosed with cancer. He told he probably had 1 year at the most to live. He responded, as many might. He quit his job. He started spending all the money that he did have. He stopped paying his mortgage. He borrowed as much as he could from every credit card that he could get. He treated himself and his family to the high life for several months. And then he got a call. He was told that there was a mistake. It was a wrong diagnosis. He did not have cancer after all. He was, in fact, very healthy. John responded by suing the Royal Cornwall Hospital. It is a rare thing for any of us to endure the nasty circumstance in which we so often find ourselves with anything like peace. But when the earthquake broke the shackles and opened the door of that cold, damp, soul-destroying hole of a prison cell, Paul and Silas apparently were perfectly content to stay where they were. Somehow, right there, they experienced a measure of peace. Well, we all know that 50 years ago last week, Apollo 11 became the first manned vehicle to land on the surface of the moon. Neil Armstrong, famously the first astronaut to step outside, and he had his famous quote repeated how many times in the last week. But the second was Buzz Aldrin. After the landing, Aldrin radioed back this message to Earth. He said, "I'd like to take this opportunity to ask every person listening in, whoever and wherever they may be, to pause for a moment and contemplate the events of the past few hours, and to give thanks in his or her own way." When it was his turn to step out of the module, Aldrin used a home communion set to become the first person to celebrate the sacrament of the Lord's Supper on the surface of the moon. Acknowledging the presence of God. You see what he was doing? Acknowledging the presence of God in that extraordinary circumstance was his way of giving thanks. And therefore, in the midst of continuing scientific uncertainty with no guarantee that they would make it back home safely, in what must have been the chaos of emotion, the astronaut found peace. In their remarkable story, we read that Paul and Silas spent their time in jail, quote, praying and singing hymns to God. Whatever the circumstance, however unwelcoming but nasty, there can be peace. As surely as the apostles found peace in their prison cell, as surely as the astronaut found peace on the surface of the moon, as surely as the psalmist expected peace in the valley of death's shadow, there can be peace if we allow ourselves to open our hearts to God with with gratitude. That's something I think we can learn from the story of those reluctant escapees. There's also this: they were willing to sacrifice their own interest for the sake of someone else. When they saw the cell doors hanging open, when he saw it, the chief jailer was terrified. Of course he was terrified. He was the one who would be held responsible. He knew what would happen to him when the officials learned that under his watch, those important prisoners had escaped. To spare himself the inevitable punishment and the shame to his family, he decided to kill himself. And would have, except that Paul shouted out that they were still there. By not escaping, they saved the man's life. The teenager excitedly told his father about a really neat activity which had been planned by his church group. Bruce echoes of what happened in Chicago. They were going to go downtown and they were going to hand out blankets to homeless people. They said, we're passing out blankets so we can tell them about Jesus. Dad knew better. He corrected his son. He said, we do not give blankets to the homeless to tell them about Jesus. We give blankets to the homeless because they are cold. Handing out blankets is a tiny sacrifice compared with staying in prison to save your jailer's life. But the moral principle is the same. It is good to help others. Doing unto others as you would have them do unto you is always, despite what we hear in our culture, despite what is being shown to us every day in every tweet and every blast on a newspaper by the so-called leaders of this culture of ours on both sides of the border, doing unto others is always the right thing to do. The consequence of the prisoner's self-sacrifice was a wonderful reciprocity of generosity. The jailer then took Paul and Silas to his own home. He washed their wounds. He fed them dinner. He treated them as honored guests. Here is in microcosm the kind of world that could be if the principle of service for others governed our behavior and shaped the policies of our communities and our government. Could be. Could be. There's so much evidence to prove it so. 100 years ago, 2 young students at Stanford University were living from hand to mouth on money they earned from part-time jobs. When they learned that the great Ignacy Paderewski would be touring in their area, they had a bright idea. They had a bright idea of promoting a concert by Paderewski. They would sell tickets and use the profit for tuition and board. They contacted the pianist manager and they learned that the fee would be $2,000. Holy moly, can you imagine how much money that was in those days? Ridiculous, but they decided it was worth the risk. They were desperate to have the money to go to university. They committed to promote the concert. Despite, however, their best efforts, they were only able to raise $1,600. $2,000 fee, they only had $1,600. After the concert, the students gave the bad news to Paderewski. They handed him the $1,600 with a promissory note saying that they would pay him the balance as soon as they could earn it. They would, of course, have to drop out of college. No boys, the master performer said. This won't do. He tore up the note, handed back the money. Now, he said, take out your expenses. Each of you keep 10% of what's left for your work. Just give me whatever is left. Years later, after the end of World War I, Paderewski had become premier of Poland, trying to figure out how to feed the thousands in his country who were starving to death after the end of the First World War. There was only one person who would be able to help. Realistically, that was Herbert Hoover, who was then head of the U.S. Food and Relief Agency. Hoover responded right away. He ordered the shipment of thousands of tons of food to Poland. And after the starving were fed, the premier traveled to Paris to personally thank Hoover, who was at a meeting in Europe. That's all right, said Hoover. That's all right, Mr. Paderewski. You don't remember it, but you helped me once when I was a student at college, and I was in trouble. Doing unto others as you would have them do unto you is always the right thing to do. So it was for Paul and Silas when they saved the life of that jailer. So it is always for us. One more thing. There's probably lots more. You can figure it out yourself. But from my point of view, there is one more thing we have to name before this is over today. Another legacy of those reluctant escapees. They trusted God for something better than what would have been their short-term gain. Paul and Silas lived their lives believing that doing God's will would result in good. In this case, that's exactly what happened. By staying in the nasty circumstance of that prison cell, they not only saved the jailer's mortal life, they were able to share the good news of the gospel with him and his entire family, but the result that they were all baptized. Now, I think this is an easy assumption to make, that every one of us has experienced circumstances we did not choose and could scarcely bear. They are the times when the best we can do is not enough. The times when the help we are offered by others is no help at all. The times when the response to our prayers is silence. They are the circumstances which feel like prison cells from which the best escape is hard to know. But God knows. And God is with us in every circumstance, never further than an outstretched hand or a word of prayer. Our job is to know it, believe it, then, like Paul and Silas, trust. Let me end with this. For John Claypool, who until his death in 2005 was one of North America's finest preachers, the worst circumstance he ever suffered was the disease that befell his little girl. He thought of that terrible captivity when a friend asked him, "Does God really help a person at a time of trouble?" Claypool replied by describing how his daughter was diagnosed with leukemia, how the treatments worked. She went into remission, and in the remission she was fine. But then Claypool goes on. Our hopes came to an abrupt end, ironically, on Easter Sunday morning, when the old pains appeared and she went into a severe relapse that involved hospitalization for some 2 weeks. Part of the time, both of her eyes were swollen shut and pain racked every part of her little body. I found myself stretched in every way, physically exhausted, emotionally dissipated, my faith itself challenged as never before. The friend said, "Give it to me straight. I'm not asking you this as a preacher, I'm asking you as an honest human being. Was there anybody or anything down there at the bottom when the chips were down? Does this thing we call God make a difference?" Abel decided to tell me the absolute truth. Yes, he said. I can honestly say there was something down there in the darkness. The mystery of Godness was there. I was given help. No ecstasy, no great energy, just the gift of endurance. That was all that met me in the depths of darkness. By the grace of God, somehow I stayed on my feet. I did not blow up in presumptive bitterness, neither did I give up in hopeless despair. I was given the gift to just stand and hold on. We know there are countless varieties of prison cells created by nasty circumstance. The one thing they have in common is that they always create in us a passionate desire to escape. Sometimes we should, not always. Sometimes we can, not always. But this is always true. God is there. The mystery of Godness is there. In the cells of darkest despair, even when escape is impossible, God is there. In the captivity of the worst circumstance, God is there. God is there. God is there. Let's pray. By everything that we believe, O God, you are here. We thank you for that assurance, for what becomes our conviction, and manifests in our hope. It allows us joy and gives us peace. As we claim it in you this morning, help us, O God, to resolve as we go from this place in any and every way possible to communicate that assurance to everyone we meet, whatever may be the circumstance.